way, if you would like to listen to this at a later time, you're able to do that. Our closed captionings are on as well. And there are a few like search functions too. If we said something and you wanted to go back and say, oh, I know they said that, you can look in or type in a certain word and it should be able to pull it up. Yeah, I think that's all the basics. You can also access the closed captioning. It's in the left corner of your screen. If you just hover over the CC icon. And yeah, well, let's get started. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So we are going to talk about, oh, sorry guys. I'm gonna open this up into the, oops, I stopped sharing, didn't I?
Yep.
The,
Excuse me. Looks like there you go. Let's back up.
okay.
So I was going to give just a brief intro. I know there's probably probably plenty of people on the on this presentation that have experience with detailed land use regulations and zoning regulations as they apply to a lot of different types of projects, and there may be folks who this is your first sort of entree into some of the minutia of how codes are applied, and so I'm gonna try to capture questions in the chat as best we can, and again, feel free if there are no silly questions. Feel free to ask anything because oftentimes these subjects are confusing even for professionals. The intro to FAR that I wanted to give is just to understand sort of what is floor area ratio intended to do and how do we do it. So a lot of folks are probably familiar with typical zoning standards that we talk about, like a required setback or a front yard or a height limit. Lot coverage is another one where there's a standard that looks at how much of the surface area of a lot, if you looked at it as a plane, is occupied by buildings, their footprint of those buildings. FAR is another way to capture or regulate the size of buildings, and it's in some ways allows some more freedom than other types of standards because the floor area ratio is really looking at how do we capture the total not just footprint of the building, but the amount of space within the building. So it was introduced in single family zones just recently. It's been a staple of zoning codes all over the country, but really in our code locally, downtown has had a floor area ratio requirement, and so has the commercial zones and the Seattle mixed zones and even the multifamily zones for quite a while. So rolling it into single family is new to that sector of the sort of development community and the areas or the types of construction that are covered by the code, but it's something that's that is pretty common elsewhere. There are a lot of different aspects to it that rest in the details, and so we can get to some of those detailed questions hopefully, sort of how these regulations are nested together with other regulations and how it's looked at. But I just wanted to give that intro because it is new to single family. It's something that folks may not have dealt with before, and honestly our reviewers are also getting up to speed in how these things apply in a context that we haven't done it before. So this I think is a good presentation for a wide range of people. So I will turn it back over to Jamie and put myself on mute. And I think we're going to try to keep questions to as much as we can to the end. I just got out of one of these sessions and it worked. We had plenty of time for, I think, almost all the questions. I'm hopeful that we will hear. To the degree we don't, we'll have resources for folks to follow up. So, okay, with that, Jamie, I'll put myself on mute.
Yeah, and since this presentation isn't as long as the other one, I think we'll have plenty of time for questions. So yeah, what we're going to cover today is, the floor area ratio in single family zones. So that's, the single family 5,000, 7,200, and 9,600, as well as the residential small lot zones, call them RSL zones. And we can touch base on like low rise zones too, if people have questions about that. So first question, what is floor area ratio? So the floor area ratio is the ratio of a building's total square footage to the size of the piece of land on which it is constructed. And so we've included a diagram here for you all. You can kind of get an idea of if you have a, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but in the top one, you have a 0.5 FAR. So the bottom square is your lot area, and this box on top of it is the, amount of FAR that's permitted. So you get half of your total lot area. Another example, you have 5,000 square feet of lot area, you'd have 2,500 square feet of permittable FAR. And the 1 point FAR and 2 point FAR are just, multipliers. In the single family zones, they don't usually, they don't get up to that much. It's limited to 0.5. We'll get into that later. And the next thing would be, how is FAR measured? So when we look at the FAR calculation, we take the gross floor area of the structure. And the gross floor area is the number of square feet total floor area bounded by the inside surface of the exterior wall of the structure, measured at the floor line. So you're not including those exterior walls. It's just the inside surface. And yeah, I dabbled on this a little bit earlier. So what's the FAR limit? So in our single family zone, so single family 5,000, 7,200, and 9,600, the FAR limit is 50%. So 50% of whatever lot area you have. If you have a lot that is below 5,000 square feet, you can include up to 2,500 square feet of total chargeable floor area. So even if you have a smaller 3,200 square feet lot, you're still permitted 2,500 square feet of gross floor area, or FAR. And in our residential small lot zones, our RSL zones, you get a little bit more FAR, you get 75%, and there isn't any other kind of like exceptions along with that. All right, and so there are a few exemptions in the floor area ratio calculation. So anything that is below grade, completely below grade, is exempt from the FAR calculation. So any of your underground basements are exempt. Additionally, if you have portions of a story that are no more than 4 feet above grade, existing or finished, whichever is lower, that is also exempt too. And we have this diagram here that kind of helps show, what we're looking for. So here you can see like all of the portions that are completely below grade are exempt. And then you get to these portions where the 4 feet mark from the exterior, or the elevation on the exterior structure, and that story, the top of the story, is no more than 4 feet. That portion is exempt as well. And this also excludes access. So if you had a door that's kind of led down to your basement, that would also, we wouldn't count that for the FAR calculation. Or sometimes like a garage door, those can happen too. So sorry if I'm going too fast. If you have any questions, like Dave said, put them in the chat box and we can definitely go back and look at any of these slides. But what else is exempt? Okay, so there's 2 different categories on this slide. We have our single family zones and our RSL zones. So in single family zones, any floor area contained in an accessory dwelling unit, whether it be an attached or detached, is exempt from the FAR calculation. And if you were listening to the presentation previous to this, accessory dwelling units can have up to 1,000 gross floor or square feet of gross floor area. So potentially houses can have 1,000 square feet exempt from the FAR calculation if they have an accessory dwelling unit. And then on top of that, you can have either up to 500 additional square feet of floor area in any accessory structure, such as a shed or other accessory structures that's not a detached accessory dwelling unit, or up to 250 square feet of floor area in an attached garage. another accessory structure, you could just have a detached garage, and that would be included in the 500 additional square feet that is exempt. And in RSL zones, so this can get kind of tricky sometimes when you read this, but 50% of the floor area that's within existing structures that are built prior to January 1st, 1982, that are single family, like principal dwelling units that will remain in residential use, those, like 50% of that gross square, I can't even talk right now, gross floor area, is exempt from the FAR calculation. So in RSL zones, you can build townhouses and row houses, or even, if you want to have 2 principal dwelling units on there, if you have an existing one, 50% of the floor area can be exempt from the FAR calculation, as long as the structure was built prior to January 1st, 1982. All right, so another scenario is, let's say you have an existing structure and maybe you're really close to the FAR limit, or you're at the FAR limit or over it. You can have, in single family zones, so single family 5,000, 7,200, and 9,600 can have do an addition that may exceed the FAR limit, as long as it does not add more than 20% of the floor area that existed on the effective date that this bill was introduced, which was back in March. Dave, you might have, I don't know if you know the exact date for that, but sometime in March, I believe. And only one addition to a single family dwelling unit may be exempted. So if you say maybe you did an addition before this ordinance became in effect and you want to do another one, you could still do that addition, but any addition after that that exceeds the FAR limit would not be permitted. And I think that's it for question, or for the PowerPoint. It was this code section isn't too long, but I'm sure that we will have tons of questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen really quickly. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand, put it in the chat box, or feel free to talk to. So it looks like John Joy has a question. Would a basement stairwell be exempt, assuming the basement is completely below grade? That's a really good question, John. So I'm going to try to do my best to describe this. When we look at stairs and think of the floor area, we kind of look at the stairs as the area below the stairs, and then we would fold the stairs up as though they were kind of closing that gap and count the actual stairs on the floor above. So if the basement was below grade, the area of the basement would be exempt, but the stairwell would probably be counted on that first floor. Dave, did I explain that well enough? Sometimes that one can get kind of tricky to explain.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, that is a great way to explain it. Is you treat it. Let's take the basement aspect out of it, and just treat it as 2 different stories where there's a set of stairs descending down. The way we would count the floor area is we would take the opening of that stairwell, and we would fold. Essentially, if you think of just folding the stairs up as if they are the floor above, and then there is a floor below. We count, that's how we would count both those areas. So essentially the stair, in most cases, the stair won't really make a difference in the way that we measure floor area. I think is kind of how I would characterize it. The basement aspect that's a little bit of a twist that is added here, is because oftentimes floor area that is below grade doesn't count. So you could have a situation where a basic the basement itself, the floor area is completely excluded, but the area of the stairs descending to it is counted. So kind of an interesting nuance. Great question.
Yeah, great question. Looks like we also have a few more questions. So Carol asked, let me scroll back up. When we remodeled in 1992, our contractor said our maximum coverage was 33%. Did it increase to 50% for a single family 5,000 lot? Another good question. So our single family zones are still subject to 35% lot coverage, which is separate from the floor area ratio. Lot coverage just looks at your kind of total structure footprint. And our residential small lot zones have a lot coverage of 50%. So that was what increased. So if by chance, if you live in a zone that did get changed to RSL zoning, then maybe it did. But so possibly if the zoning changed, but it sounds like it might still be single family 5,000, which would have a 35% lot coverage. All right, let's see. And if you have any follow-up questions too, you can raise your hand or, feel free to unmute yourself and, chat so that way I can still stay on your question. All right, going on. Chris, please discuss the best way to document FAR for permit submittal. I've provided sample calculations and they were accepted. Other times the reviewer wanted more detailed calculations and diagrams. Another good question. When I look for FAR diagrams, I like to see kind of like a floor plan that's of all levels kind of condensed on one page. You don't need to include, a lot of floor plans have like the bed and the, a dining room table. Those details don't matter, but we like to see the dimensions of the gross floor area. So the measurements of the interior or the exterior wall that measured from interior. I just messed that up. Sorry, guys. But we like to see the gross floor area measurement so that we can verify those calculations. And if anything is exempt from FAR, we like to have, enough evidence so that we can verify it's exempt. So if you have something that's partially below grade, we like to look at elevation plans that show this is where the structure at this point is no more than 4 feet above grade. And, however far that is from like the facade so that we can measure that or take those measurements and then compare them to the FAR diagram to make sure, yes, this point is, exempt. Dave, is there anything that you like to see on FAR diagrams? If you're talking.
Sorry, the unmute thing is a huge pain. No, that is typically what we need to see. What we need to see are, the tip that we have on FAR, and then I think there's some director's rules and other rules kind of are the summation of that. I can understand how you get different questions from different reviewers because oftentimes we're trying to document different types of things. What's not necessarily intuitive is that FAR is used as a tool in different zones, different ways, and single family zones have a set of things that are exempted from FAR than would be, say, in a downtown zone. And so oftentimes the nuances of what we end up asking for really pivot on clearly demonstrating a portion of it that's exempt. An example I might use is the interface between maximum unit size. So the maximum size of a dwelling unit is one set of regulations in single family. So an ADU can't be more than 1,000 square feet. But then there are some portions of the size of that ADU that are excluded, like a garage or like some small storage areas. Well, then floor area for the single family, gross floor area, is measured very similarly, but we're looking at the total unit size, the total size of the single family dwelling unit minus the ADU. So it's very common to have some overlap and a lot of confusion, especially in the back and forth of permit review, where we're kind of trying to drill down on detail aspects of it. So for the most part, following our guidelines on how to document FAR, that'll put you in good stead. But there's almost always a circumstance where the interpretation of the applicant as to what's exempt, or the outline of exempt, or the edge of what's exempt from what's counted comes into play. So that becomes a challenge. So, yeah.
I might also add to that in the RSL zones, mandatory housing is applicable there. And so, for those ones where you would have to pay a fee per square foot, I definitely, for myself, it's really important that I have all the correct information to verify that, the payment amount is correct, because we don't want to, someone to include gross floor area that didn't need to be included. So, and in that instance, I definitely like the more detailed, the better. But that's not for all zones. Okay, let's see. Carol has another question. What are height restrictions for single family home that is a third story allowed? Another good question. So in SF zones, we have a height limit of 30 feet that is measured from the average grade. And there are additional allowances for a pitched roof or a shed roof. So the third story kind of depends on where the first floor of the house starts and maybe how tall your ceilings are. And yeah, I would say we don't look at it as like the number of stories rather than just the 30 feet measured from average grade. Any additions to that, Dave? Not sure.
Nope. That covers it. In general, you can get 3 stories in a single family zone unless the lot is narrower than 30 feet, or there are some other radical constraints about in terms of the slope of the lot or conditions. But in general, that's something that's doable. Yeah.
All right. John has another question. How about a stairwell going up to an attic AADU? This one could be, I could see this in a few different ways. If the stairwell is a part of the accessory dwelling unit, and you have a door to that and it's a separate door, I would think that that's the stairwell is a part of the AADU and would be exempt from FAR if I'm looking at it in like that kind of lens. But I know there's also, I would say if it's an accessory dwelling unit, there's probably a minimum floor to ceiling height. And if it's in an attic, you still have to have that minimum floor to ceiling height. It would probably most likely.
Yeah. So a stairwell going up to an attic ADU. That's a good question. My gut is until you're in the ADU, you probably count that square footage. But if it is, I'm trying to think. Yeah, you would. There would be really no way around it. I don't think it wouldn't be able to be exempted. But I suppose if it was a stairwell and there was a door at the bottom of it that separated the ADU from the principal unit, then you would probably lump that stairwell space, that floor area, into the ADU itself.
Yeah. I think that one kind of goes more into like how the figured, and I can't remember the director's rule off the top of my head, David, but if you had an attic and say it wasn't an ADU, we do have a certain kind of like threshold for like the
Yes,
floor to ceiling height.
Below a certain ceiling height, we discount that like an attic space that has where the actual roof is intruding into the headspace, so it's not flat, it's a pitch. I'm kind of lost for how you characterize that, but it's your classic raftered attic. And yes, we have a director's rule on that. I will pull it up and put a link to it in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so Kevin has a question: is a deck, porch, or storage shed exempt from FAR? I would say in most cases, a deck and a porch are not included in the FAR calculations, as they're kind of like their exterior finishes, I suppose, is a way to look at it. And a storage shed, if it meets the that height requirement of I think it's 7 feet is the threshold. And there's like walkable area, then the storage shed could potentially be included in the FAR calculation. Let's see. Okay. lost where I was. Okay, max. Our house lot is about 8 feet above street level. Our detached single car garage has a roof that is 1 foot above that but opens to the street level. Would we be able to expand to a 2-car garage without impacting our FAR, or would it be exempt from the 4 foot per grade rule? So I'm still trying to envision what that question.
Yeah. That's probably a bit specific for us to be able to answer without some context and looking at it. I would suggest you use the Q&A link above. In general, I would look to first, is there any reason why it would be exempt from FAR in general? So when you go to the code itself and it says this is what we count in floor area ratio limits, the one that you're focused on, I think, is the following areas exempt from FAR: all stories or portions of stories that are underground. Again, we're sort of in a circumstance where we have different limitations doing different things. So something could be count towards FAR but be exempted from the maximum unit size, or vice versa. In this case, I think it's really going to come to the ability to expand the garage in terms of FAR limitations will come down to how much of that floor area is counted towards FAR. Yes, some amount would. Is all of it? Unlikely that all of it would. I'm sure there's some portion that would be exempt, but I think it is unlikely that what you're describing, a terraced garage, sort of built into the hillside, which is a pretty common development pattern, it's really unlikely that it wouldn't affect FAR at all. It's some amount of it is very likely to. Just for those that are kind of catching up, there's I have a link that I'm going to plug into the chat here. Oh, I just did. There's a link to a director's role on FAR that I just plugged into the chat that you can also look at for some of the
stuff.
stuff.
To add on to that too, you still get, if it's in a single family zone, you'd have 500 square feet of an accessory structure such as a detached garage that's exempt too. So if the below grade, wasn't working there, that could come into play too. Okay, another question: would an elevator shaft be exempt? It's another good question. Dave, correct me if I'm wrong.
It's not exempt. It's yeah, it's captured. It is captured in FAR. The way that it works, it really goes to a definitional requirement. So all gross floor area, or sort of all area that is bounded by the inside surface of the exterior walls, is counted. So, for instance, demising walls, or separation, partition walls between spaces are not excluded from FAR. An elevator shaft would not be excluded from FAR. The only instance I could think of is sometimes, buildings will have a shaft in it, like a light well or something like that, where the exterior wall really is going around a space which is interior to the footprint of the building, but really is exterior. That is an exterior wall. That would be an instance where that would clearly be excluded from FAR because it is an exterior wall itself. But an elevator shaft, no, those are counted.
Yes. Okay, another question: for a detached garage replacement or construction that is less than 250 square feet of FAR, does a principal structure need to be documented to show FAR? That's a good question.
It's a good one. It's going to be a judgment call based on what we know about the existing structure. For instance, if let's say that the house was constructed in 2010 and there's plans on file and it's very clear that the square footage of the building is well below FAR requirements. It's something like 1,700 square feet, and the limitation in that particular case is 2,200 square feet or something. Well, actually, that'd be sort of borderline. That might be an area where we go, okay, well, adding 250 is really close, so we do want you to document it. When there's a huge delta between what's available in terms of a FAR versus what's already been charged for FAR, we tend to try to not make people provide details that are not necessary. But for the most part, in most projects, we're going to ask you to document it anytime you're adding what we call chargeable FAR, or FAR that counts towards the total. FAR that doesn't count, so portions of structures that are completely below grade, or let's say adding an accessory dwelling unit, a detached accessory dwelling unit that doesn't count towards FAR. In those cases, it's pretty common for us to not require it.
I think, and in this case, if it's a detached garage, and if the garage is less than 250 square feet, since that would be, assuming there is no other accessory structures on the lot, and I wouldn't
Yeah.
dig too far into being like, oh, you need to.
Yeah. Unless it was close, we probably wouldn't have to dig. But anytime it's close, we're definitely going to make you document it. And it's not, it's not a daunting calculation, really. It's something that, for the most part, in single family construction, unless you have a really building with a lot of modulation, it's pretty straightforward. It's something that is fairly typical to what an architect or a designer or even a contractor would be using, the measurements they'd be using for a takeoff or some sort of a bid or something. So
Yeah. Looks like that was the last of the questions
okay.
in the chat
Yeah.
box.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any other comments? Would you like me to bring back the PowerPoint to, show you any of the diagrams? Can't think of any other interesting scenarios off of the top of my head that people might benefit from. Will slides be available? Yes. Okay. Let me bring back the PowerPoint. I've had someone ask that. Okay. So I don't know. Did I see a square, like a gray box on the screen? It's like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel so. Some of the important slides on here were what is the floor area ratio, and so we talked a little bit about that, which is the building's, your lot area, your total lot area, and the floor area ratio is the building's total square footage to the size of the piece of land. And here's some diagrams, and then how it's measured. So here's this is a more complex diagram, I would say. This is from a townhouse structure, and so they have a lot of other details in here, but it could be as simple as just the perimeter and showing that these interior measurements. This is pretty detailed. Let's see. So the FAR limit between the single family zones and the RSL zones varies. Single family is 0.5, RSL is 7.5. And again, if you have a smaller lot that's below the 5,000 square feet, you can have up to 2,500 square feet automatically. And exempt. So if you did have portions that were exempt that were below grade, we would this is a pretty basic diagram, but we would like to see something like this on the elevation that says, here's the grade, and this is the portion that's below. Similar to this, here's the grade, and here's the portions that's no more than 4 feet below grade. And this is what we've just been recently talking about, or what is exempt. I see we have a few more questions, so I'm going to go back to the chat. Okay, so let's see. Last question. Both ADU and DADU isn't included in the FAR. That is correct. In single-family zones, in some circumstances, don't want to say all, but you can have up to 2 accessory dwelling units, and both of them could be exempt from the FAR calculation. There are some situations where if a lot's too small, you could only have 1. What are the chances this FAR will change within the next 5 years? Dave, I'm going to put that question in.
Oh, I'm not a betting man when it comes to how often the regulations will be adjusted. I don't know, and I don't know if there's anybody. I don't know if there's a huge constituency out there who is lobbying for different standards or not. I would anticipate, there's been pretty consistent changes to the land use code over the last 10, 15 years, and then a flurry of a lot of changes in a very short period of time. So if I were to guess, I would say it's probably unlikely that it'll change anytime soon. I think we probably do need to get a couple of years of understanding how all these things are going to play out in terms of a development pattern. People need to kind of learn the standards and figure out what works, and the market adjusts. So I think it's unlikely, but you can never say never. That there's always the possibility that council will have a different perspective and go back and change the laws, which is, it's good. That's what we should do, is adjust as we go. So.
Okay. Another question. For new construction, is there an appeals process if a plan is slightly over the FAR limit?
Do you want me to do that one?
There's not an appeals process.
Yeah.
It's just kind of it's a type 1.
Yeah.
Just nothing's really no adjustment.
There's actually some nuance to it I can go into if we really want to get inside baseball, which is that there is always a way to appeal something, right? There's a way that you can in the state of Washington, you can file what is called a land use petition act appeal. So it's called a LUPA in layman's terms, and it means that you're filing, basically suing the city or the decision-making body, whoever it is. Like maybe it was City Light, made a decision to put a new transformer box somewhere, and within 21 days of that decision, you can file an appeal in Superior Court. But it is basically suing the city. There's not an administrative appeal, as Jamie's getting at. There's not like if somebody asks for a variance, there's this administrative appeal process. It's not like going to court, but it's really going to a hearing examiner, which is a city official that's meant to impartially arbitrate land use decisions. And on some decisions, she is required by code to give deference to the department, and in other decisions, there is no deference given to either the applicant or the appellant. But for most new construction, there isn't an appeal process. And so the question of, if my neighbor builds a house and it's slightly over FAR, or I think it's slightly over FAR and I want to challenge it, there's not really an administrative appeal. Within 21 days of us issuing the permit, you can always file a LUPA, but it's very difficult to do, which is one of the reasons why we're honestly so rigorous and oftentimes very fussy about how we document these things, because there's not a lot of chance to fix it if we don't get it right. So some of the questions you saw earlier about, I've been asked different things from different reviewers, that really goes to us trying to be careful in how we document compliance with things that people feel are important, like FAR and height and things like that. So sorry, I mean to interrupt there.
No, that's really good. All right. Chris asks, I assume the accessory structure can be larger than the discount given for a dadu and garage. The balance of the structure would be charged towards the total FAR allowed on the lot. Are you, Chris, I think I might need you to expand on that a little more. Are you saying that the accessory structure can be, like, the exemption can be larger? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking is that, so an accessory structure, you have 1,000 square feet for a DADU. You've got 250 square feet for a garage. So that gives you 1,250. And let's say I've got a 2,000 square foot structure. So the balance of that would be charged to the allowable FAR on the site.
Oh, I see. So you have a mix of things that are exempt and not, and you want to know how it's sort of allocated, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, in the case of something where it's a structure that some things count and some things don't, yes, it is the part that is counted goes towards the FAR, or the total lot, whatever the chargeable amount is, and we look at that together with what's already been built on the lot. So you got let's say there's an existing house and it has a certain amount of FAR, and some portions of it are exempt, and so we have to get down to what's the total number for that, and then. Yes, a dadu and a garage, and the dadu doesn't count, but the garage does count, and so we have to. Yeah, you've captured it exactly right.
Great. And then my question about the garage, since we're the 250 square feet is exempt for the garage, as long as it's under 250, and it's essentially not chargeable. I'm assuming I don't have to draw floor plans to represent the.
Oh, I see.
Did
you ask the same question earlier in there? We kind of side.
That's the other garage question I asked.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah. No, I And I'm afraid my answer, I think, is the same. And the reason for it is this. uh, uh, it was, there's no way to really parse it unless you're getting down to specifics. But basically I think what it comes down to is, yes, in an ideal situation where you know that 250 is exempt and we know it doesn't count towards the overall, and we know what all the exempt spaces are within the thing you're building, then yeah, ideally we wouldn't have to do that documentation. But it is rarely that clean. What we often find is somebody has a garage that's about, whatever, 310. Some portion of it is not garage. Some portion of it is garage. And so we get into enough detail or enough minutia that we end up needing to document the whole thing. But in the way that you're phrasing it, I mean, it's a very clean, like, I'm just coming in to build a 1-car garage in my backyard. What's the big deal? You're right. That sort of situation, or, just a 2-car garage that is well under the numbers. Yes, that in those cases, we can often not do a calculation. In fact, sometimes those permits are even STFI, so we have very little in the way of FAR calculations. Yes. So
that's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Carol has an question. Since you said attached open deck is not part of the FAR, if we enclose the deck, would it be part of the 35% allowable FAR for single family homes? Just to clarify, are you talking about the 35% for lot coverage or the 50% for the FAR? Well, I'll go into it. If it's completely enclosed and it has walls around it, then it would be included in the FAR. But if it's just a deck with some, you have a roof over it with some railings, no, we wouldn't count that towards the FAR. But if for lot coverage, this is like a posted deck, if it's posted on each corner, then we would include lot coverage. That's the direction that we usually go.
Yeah. If you had something where actually it goes to this, you have a structure that doesn't have walls, right? Like you have a carport, or carport's a bad example because it has a different exemption, but you have a covered deck that has no walls. It doesn't count towards FAR because it doesn't meet the definition of gross floor area, which is that it has walls and interior space. As soon as we create something that has interior space, then it becomes, in most cases, FAR, unless it meets some other exemption. So yes, it may already be lot coverage, but then it becomes FAR with the addition of a wall. That's probably the easiest way to say it.
You mentioned parking, David. I think that's probably a really good.
Yeah. Okay. This is my least favorite subject in the world. Okay, so this is important because in many cases, the area covered by parking, unless it's otherwise exempt, is counted towards FAR. So I'll give you an example that's very easy to understand, which is the old style. It's not even that old, really, but let's say 1960s, 70s, and 80s style apartment building, stacked flats, sort of on posts over a common carport. Where you have a carport that people drive in underneath, which is a development pattern you see still around the city in some places. People aren't building them new, but there's structures like that where you have a building that is over a parking area, and it's not enclosed, so it's not really a garage. It's not gross floor area in that sense. The code actually says the area covered by parking is counted in FAR in some circumstances, not all zones. But so in those circumstances, we actually have to get down to a very fine-grained sort of analysis of, is the parking space in the maneuvering area inside the parking area, sort of the parking aisles and things, are those covered by occupiable space above? So, for instance, like an eave sticking out, we wouldn't say parking that's just underneath this, little 18-inch eave prow sticking out on a building covering portion of a parking space. That wouldn't count towards FAR. But something that is structured like a carport or a common parking garage over a parking area, despite the fact that it's not the inside surface of an exterior wall, that would count towards FAR. So I think one of the most, what that really tells you is not necessarily whether to worry about parking or not, but that when thinking about FAR, you really have to start with the definitional standards of what it is, and then start looking at exemptions. So you start at the definition, try to capture everything that's FAR, and then start carving away the things that are exempted, excluded, not counted, discounted. There's, you know, a bunch of different ways in the code that we handle that. And that's probably one of the most nuanced and challenging ways that we've decided to regulate, let's say, parking or the size of buildings. So it is a real challenge. We recognize that. And, you know, we try to work with people on how they document that as best we can, because it is not an easy thing to conceptualize. So I would always start with the definitions at 2384 A00, 2386 006. That's the code section that talks about FAR, and then work your way back to the actual standards of how you exclude or include things in that calculation. So, if that makes sense.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, sorry.
A good description. So we're a complicated topic. Okay, so does anyone else have any other questions? Again, if you do have any questions that, you know, you think of later, you can always submit to our online land use Q&A. Can you please put the link to that code section in the chat if you can? You were mentioning it was the definitions, right, David?
Mm-hmm. That's right, 2380. Well, definitions is a 2384. 2384A, and then the measurement section, I'm sorry, that really is more of a descriptor for how it's measured. There's a 2388, 2386. I think it's 006. Let me pull it up real quick. And actually, you know, for the good of everyone, I'm going to just see if I can plop that into the chat, because it is a thick bit of reading.
I put the measurement section in the chat. Yeah, that measurement section talks about.
Oh, it's 007. I'm sorry. I really apologize, guys. I got that wrong. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna just drop the words right into the chat. Boop.
So if you guys do have any other questions that come up, you can use our online land use Q&A, where a planner like myself will look at your question, and if it's more specific to like a certain location, you know, we're able to, you know, look at it a little more closely. And if not, we are recording this, and this will be available to you guys later if you want to rewatch it and look over the PowerPoint at some other time. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Usually this is scheduled to go till 3, but this is definitely, this PowerPoint was not as long as the accessory dwelling unit.
Okay.
That's no problem. You're here to share the info. Are the PowerPoints also available on the website later? That's a good question, Doug. I might have to.
I think we'll probably have. Yeah, we should probably do that. I know that the other PowerPoint for ADUs, we're going to try to make that available rather than having everybody, you know, just ask by email. I think we're going to try to make it available. But failing that, you know, my email address is my name plus at seattle.gov. So david.vanskyke at seattle.gov. Jamie's runs the exact same pattern. You know, go ahead and ping, and we will try to get you the stuff if it isn't put on the website. If you don't see it go up in the next couple days, probably I would best like Tuesday or so it should go up. And then again, use the Q&A liberally. That is really, in this time, our best method for getting info out to people. You know, we don't have a counter service anymore. We're not available sort of directly by phone. And so that's the best way to start a conversation. And frankly, when you do a Q&A and it's really complicated, a lot of times we will just have to call you back and talk on the phone, which I think is something we're all working to get better at doing in this time. You know, I go back to the olden days when people would talk on the phone instead of texting. So hopefully we can get you kind of queued up to the right direction. So
yeah. Oh, Max, thank you. I'm glad that you think that.
Yeah, thanks, Max.
Try to answer everyone's questions as best as we can. Oh, thanks, Doug, as well. Well, no one has any other questions. I suppose we could end the meeting. One last 10 seconds, like in case anyone wants to raise their hand or ask something. Oh, we do have one more. Can you just confirm definition of measuring the building area for lot coverage?
So, how to measure lot coverage? Yeah, you want to take that one? That's actually almost as hard.
Yeah, for lot coverage, we just look at the footprint of the structure. So that would include the exterior walls. If you have eaves that are over 36 inches, though any portion that's excess of the 36 inches, we include that. And there are some other small things that are included, like if you have a deck that's above 36 inches or little things like that. But for the most part, it's the footprint of the principal structure. So that does include the exterior walls, which is different from the FAR calculation.
Right. It's lot coverage and FAR work very similar in that your friend is probably an Excel spreadsheet when you're working with them, because there are especially if you're having to measure it yourself. Let's say it's a project that you didn't need to hire an architect for. You're really just trying to document something, that a project that you're doing yourself or that you're having a contractor do. You really start with the maximum extent of a thing. So what's the total size of the amount of the footprint of the area that is being covered, like say for lot coverage. And then, as Jamie pointed out, the first 36 inches of eaves, you exclude that. Any deck that's under 36 inches, you would exclude that. There are portions like porches and little portions of a structure which don't count towards lot coverage, and you really again have to start with the whole and then start exempting pieces out, which I know can be frustrating when you're trying to figure out how big a thing can be. You sort of start by, okay, I'm going to draw the biggest thing that I think I would want and then carve away all the other stuff, and then I come up with an answer. Recognize that can be a challenging way to do it, but in terms of documenting it, that's the way we do the calculations, both for lot coverage and FAR. That is sort of the best practice for getting at an accurate answer. So,
yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining in. I really hope you guys found this information useful, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday as well.
Yeah. Have a good day, everybody. Have a safe weekend, and hopefully we'll hear from when you have a project for us to work on.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. So everyone will be kicked out after I do this. Goodbye. Oops, save meeting files. Yes.